We have a great many questions. There are alive today on the planet 1 billion people for whom none of these technologies have yet reached because they live in absolute poverty, and another 1 billion who live just above that level. That's more people than were on the planet at the start of the century. What should engineers do to ensure that their gifts are delivered to the poorest 1 or 2 billion people on the planet?
I wish that engineers were sufficiently erudite to know how best to encourage the use of their creative minds to the less developed parts of our societies. As I said, we went from 1.6 billion to 6 billion in this past century, and I suspect that we'll have continued growth in the next century, more like than unlike that rate. It will be a real challenge for engineering not only to get ahead, but just to keep the pace.
At the Press Club, we operate on a form of inquiry that you didn't mention, which is an opinion poll of a sample of 1. But in your opinion, what would be one of the 20 great achievements in the 21st century?
Getting rid of the credit card.
Washington is in a bit of a traffic uproar today over the high price of fuel. What can engineering do in the next few years to deal with rising fuel costs?
This is certainly a very important subject right now, and particularly in the district. Nevertheless, we enjoy a world where even at the high prices that unleaded premium gets today, it's less expensive than bottled water at the market. And when one looks at the components of that price, we find that most of the cost of fuels is not either in the basic BTUs or its transport to your home or business, wherever you need it. It's the primary components are payments to governments, both at the place where the fuels come from and those where it's sold. So if we are to change the price of fuel, and we enjoy still at the elevated prices today at 3 to 1, or perhaps advantage over typical countries in other parts of the world, we can look to governments to think about how best to work on that problem.
What would you do to rekindle the public's imagination and dreams for space exploration? And, for example, would this include a mission to send astronauts to Mars?
Well, I'd volunteer. And I'm sure it would rekindle enthusiasm. But I don't find a lack of enthusiasm among our nation's young today. Every place I go and the students that I talk with are they're brighter than we were when we were students, and they're very highly motivated, and they're very eager to contribute to to the solution of society's problems. So I am not worried about our young people.
While advances in engineering improve the quality of life, they also raise moral issues. What's your opinion of controversies such as questions of bioethics over genetic engineering and cloning?
Anybody got any easy questions? Those kinds of things are outside my field. They're remarkable progress being made in those sections of science, engineering, and technology where we're learning about the human genome. We're making remarkable strides in gene transplants and a variety of areas. It is true that anything that can be used can be abused, and that's true everywhere. I think it's unlikely that we will have much reduction in the amount of progress in that area, however, because the favorable consequences to society far outweigh the possible disadvantages.
You served, I'm told, as vice chairman of the Presidential Commission on the Space Shuttle Challenger accident. And a member of our audience asks, with losses such as the Martian lander in 1999 and going back to mishaps such as the design problems with the Hubble, what's your view of NASA's performance in carrying out the U.S. space program?
Well, I, like most of you, know what I learned through the newspapers, television, the media, and it's always disappointing to have failures, but as I pointed out earlier, I think our number of failures is small compared to our number of successes, and there is no progress without risk. And I think when we get to the point where we are making no mistakes, we'll also make little progress.
A member of our audience asks, has going to space created hardship on your body or in your aging? And I would ask also, what do you know about the status of biomedical engineering and attempts to make it more possible for people not only to travel in space, but to grow old there?
I wish I had a little more knowledge about this subject. I would do something about my own condition first. The first part of the question
was how you believe space travel has affected yourself.
We all know that people can safely go into space for extended periods of time and return without substantial physical or psychological or physiological damage. And there's still much to be learned. We need more experience. There's evidence that we may need to have a sort of an artificial gravity of some sort if the human is to be able to persevere for extended periods of time, I say years in space, which may well be necessary if we're going to fly, take humans to other planets. But that's a work in progress, and I would hope that the International Space Station, now in assembly, will help us answer many of those questions.
Since you brought it up, one member of the audience says, if Russia is such a rundown country, why does it have a space station and we don't? Tell us a little bit about your views of the International Space Station and what we should learn from it in engineering.
The old Soviet Union certainly did a wonderful job of focusing on early space stations and getting them into the air and operable for long periods of time. The Mir lasted, I don't know, 6 or 8 years past its warranty, and it's still hanging on, albeit by perhaps a thread. I think the International Space Station will provide a opportunity for work in a variety of engineering and scientific disciplines, and I hope they are able to get this major component they're awaiting right now up there very soon to keep the progress on time. I understand the schedule is certainly in some jeopardy as a result of the delayed delivery of the Russian component. Having said that, I believe that for the International Space Station, once operable, will provide a wonderful opportunity for university and college systems in particular to participate, for the opportunity for academic projects for graduate students in association with the activities that are going on in the ISS are remarkable, and I look forward to that time.
Is there any way to support the development of space technology without concurrently supporting military space science, or are the two inextricably joined?
I don't know the answer. They always have been joined in the past, at least since World War II to the present time. They have been joined, and I would hope that either one could persevere independently, but I don't have an answer to that question. It wasn't, in my knowledge, looked at in terms of this study that we're just reported on today.
Is there less emphasis on other forms of engineering now because of the growth of software engineering?
Oh, students are undoubtedly attracted, like the rest of us, to whatever the hot subject of the time is. And so there have been, maybe a couple of decades ago, there was enormous attraction of electrical engineers away from power generation and transmission over into solid-state electronics. And now we see a transfer of interest from a number of disciplines into software engineering because, frankly, that's where the action is. It's not only a lot of projects going on, but there's a lot of bucks out there, and people are attracted to having a part of that. So I think that will continue for some time, but like a pendulum, everything changes, and the problem of the high school guidance counselor who tells the graduating senior what he should be studying when he goes to college based on what's happening in the world today. Of course, it's going to be 4 or 5 years later when he gets out of college, and by that time the whole world's changed, and so his or her decisions were often wrong. So that's not something I think we can avoid.
Of course, your education, like my own, was achieved without the use of the internet. The question is, should young people have internet skills as an important part of their education, or is this counterproductive, and should our kids be spending less time with the internet?
My experience is limited here, but it seems like an 8-year-old who can't navigate his way around the net is rather behind his classmates. So I'm reminded by the cartoon that I remember seeing a couple of years ago, which maybe somebody in the audience drew, but it was a cartoon about the V-chip, and it showed this lady talking to this child and say, I now have this component which we can put into our television set, and then I can control what kind of programs you see. And she looked down at the 7-year-old and said, would you put it in for me?
In your own engineering work, could you tell us what's the toughest engineering problem that you're trying to solve right now?
Oh, there are so many. I think fundamental engineering problems still tend to be the most vexing. How to get higher efficiencies and higher reliabilities, or lower weights and lower costs. That is the inevitable top priority for all our engineers.
So if I could be more efficient and lose some weight and spend less money, I'd have your problem solved. What do you think of the marriage of corporate and government space programs?
Well, it's inevitable. I don't believe the government has the capacity these days to operate independently from industry. And in fact, they haven't. All the projects with which I'm familiar and with which I've been associated have been projects that took the very best abilities that were available from government, industry, and the universities.
Some time ago, the federal government was talking about a plane that they envisioned as the Orient Express, a hyperplane that would get us from here to Tokyo in practically no time. Where is that technology, and is that ever going to be available, or for that matter, necessary?
I don't know the answer. I was not involved in that project, and I don't personally know the technologies. So, but I have a little experience in going fast, and I like it, and I think you would too.
What in your background as an engineering student prepared you most for your career as an astronaut?
Well, an engineering education did for me as the question is for an astronaut, but that was a relatively small portion of my career. But the same thing that it does for anyone going into any other endeavor. It's a basis of a manner of thinking, a logic process, and a rigorous attention to detail. And I think that will will serve any student well. I do believe that our engineering universities and colleges across the country enjoy pretty good rate of participation, and I think the students today have a very exciting future.
Before I ask you one last question, I would like to give you our National Press Club Certificate of Appreciation. We do appreciate your visit here today.
Thank you.
The much sought-after National Press Club coffee mug. In a weightless environment, you can hold it this way. And of course, although we have many engineers in the room, we also have some children in the room, and one of them, I tell by the handwriting, wrote, "Do you have dreams about being on the moon? If so, describe them."
I can honestly say, and it's a great surprise to me, that I have never had a dream about being on the moon. It's a great disappointment to me, even more than to you.
Well, maybe tonight. I'd like to thank you for coming today. I'd like to ask those of you in the audience, please, to remain seated while Mr. Armstrong leaves the ballroom, because he has a very tight schedule. We want to get him out on the elevator. I'd like to thank the National Press Club staff members, Emily Reed, Pat Nelson, Joanne Booz, Melanie Abdow-Dermott, and Howard Rothman for organizing today's lunch. And also thanks to the National Press Club Library for their research. And thank you all for coming. We are adjourned. Please hold your seats.